My name is Emily Carter. I'm a mother, a nurse, and for most of my life, I believed I was a faithful Christian. You know, the kind who prays before meals, goes to church every Sunday, volunteers at the soup kitchen, raises her kids, in the word sings in the worship team. I did all the right things, said all the right words. If you'd asked anyone in town, they'd tell you I was as solid in my faith as anyone could be. But what I'm about to tell you shattered everything I thought I knew about God, heaven, and myself. It started on the 25th of July. The sky had been growling since morning, and the weather guys had been warning us about possible flash floods. But we've heard that before, right? Still, something felt different. The clouds hung heavy, like they were waiting for permission to break. And when they finally did, it was like the heavens opened with fury. Rain came down like bullets on the rooftop. Within hours, our quiet Missouri neighborhood was underwater. I watched through the kitchen window as the creek behind our backyard swelled faster than I'd ever seen. Water crept across the grass, reached the driveway, then climbed the steps of our front porch. That's when I knew. We had to get out, but I couldn't think only about my family. I'd been a nurse for over 15 years. Helping people was hardwired into me, so I loaded up my old pickup with emergency supplies and started knocking on doors. One of the first was Mrs. Robinson's. She's 84, lives 3 houses down. She's tough as nails, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I promised I'd get her and her dog to safety. It should have been a quick trip to the community center, 15 minutes tops, but every street looked like a river. Signs were gone, cars were abandoned, nothing was familiar. I was driving blind in a place I'd lived all my life. Then I saw it in my rearview mirror, a wall of water, not just a wave, a wall. A flash flood surge coming down from the hills like a freight train. There was nowhere to turn, no high ground, no escape. The water slammed into us from behind. The truck was lifted like a toy and thrown sideways. I remember Mrs. Robinson screaming, the crunch of metal, the windshield shattering like 1,000 diamonds. And then blackness. I woke up underwater, pinned under the bridge by something heavy. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My lungs were burning. Every instinct told me to fight, but it was no use. The current was too strong. My strength was gone. And in that moment, when I knew I wasn't going to make it, my thoughts didn't go to my house or my phone or my bank account. They went to my husband, my 2 girls, and my baby boy, who had just learned to say mama. I thought of Mrs. Robinson and prayed she'd survived. Then I felt it. My heart stopped. No more pain, no more fear, just silence. And then light. But this wasn't a tunnel like the stories. It wasn't peaceful music or floating angels. No, I found myself standing in something that felt like a courtroom, but not of this world. There were no walls, just endless space, and a presence that made every part of me tremble. And in the center was a throne blazing with light. And sitting on it was Jesus. Not the soft, smiling Jesus from children's books. This was the risen King. His eyes were like fire. And when he looked at me, it was like everything I'd ever thought, ever said, ever done was wide open. No secrets, no masks. Emily, you have called yourself mine, but have you truly known me? I wanted to speak, to explain, to list every Sunday service, every act of charity. But the words dissolved in my mouth. In that presence, all my self-righteousness felt like dust. I stood there speechless. I have brought you here not to condemn you, but to show you what many refuse to see. What he showed me next would haunt me forever. Before we go further, I need you to pause and ask yourself something. Are you sure you truly know him? Not just know about him, but know him. If you feel a stirring in your heart right now, don't ignore it. Comment Amen below. Tell us where you're watching from so we can pray for your city, your home, your family. And if this message is already making you feel something deep inside, like you've forgotten something eternal, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share this with someone you love. Because what comes next isn't just a story. It's a warning. Let's continue. I stood frozen in that place of unimaginable glory, unable to move, unable to hide. It felt like time itself had stopped, like the weight of eternity was pressing down on my soul. Jesus looked at me, and I could feel it. Not just his eyes, not just his gaze. I could feel his knowing, like he saw every part of me, even the parts I'd forgotten. My motives, my secrets, my fears. My faith, yes, but also my pride. My worship, but also my resentment. My prayers and the poison hiding beneath them. You have lived a life of religion, but you have forgotten relationship. Those words hit me like thunder. I wanted to defend myself, to speak up, to say, but Lord, I served in church. I taught Sunday school. I brought meals to sick neighbors. I tried to be kind. I raised my kids, right? But I couldn't say it. Because I knew, deep down, that while I had performed the motions, my heart was often somewhere else. I do not seek perfect performance. I seek a broken and contrite heart. Suddenly, it was like the air around us shifted, and the throne room faded. I found myself standing beside Jesus on what felt like the edge of forever. A massive chasm stretched out before us, black and deep and endless. And from below, I heard sounds that froze the blood in my veins. Cries, screams, not of physical pain, but of regret, despair, anguish beyond words. The kind of torment that comes not from what was done to you, but from what you failed to do. Jesus stood beside me, silent for a moment, as I watched the darkness swirl below. Then he spoke. This is not a place for the wicked, as the world defines them. This is where many who called me Lord have found themselves. My breath caught. I saw faces down there. Not monsters, not demons. People, familiar ones, men and women in suits and dresses, people who once sang worship songs, who stood on pulpits, who laid hands on the sick, their faces twisted not from torture but from the unbearable weight of truth too late understood. They knew of me, but they never truly knew me. One by one, Jesus showed me their lives. A worship leader who inspired thousands but never forgave his father. A pastor who preached grace but held grudges against those who left his church. A woman who hosted prayer groups but never released the bitterness she carried since childhood. I saw it like threads of darkness woven into beautiful tapestries. Outwardly perfect, but underneath, rotting from a single hidden infection. Unforgiveness is not a small wound. It is a poison, and it has separated millions from me. I felt sick, nauseous in my soul. I turned to Jesus trembling. Lord, how can this be? These were good people. They loved you. They loved an idea of me, but they refused to love like me. And then came the hardest moment of all. Jesus turned to me gently but firmly. Emily, I must show you your own heart. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear. But there was nowhere to go. The air grew still again, and suddenly I saw my life, play before me like a movie I couldn't pause. I saw myself at 16 when my best friend betrayed me in front of everyone. I smiled on the outside, but inside I had built a wall I never took down. I saw the supervisor who denied me a promotion and how I congratulated the other nurse with gritted teeth. I saw family members I hugged during holidays, while secretly holding their words against them year after year. I whispered, I thought I forgave them. I prayed about it. Forgiveness is not a word whispered in prayer. It is a choice lived out with love. To forgive is to release, to bless those who cursed you, to love those who never said sorry. Tears ran down my face, not because I was ashamed, but because for the first time I saw what my unforgiveness had done. It hadn't just wounded others. It had separated me from the very presence of the God I claimed to worship. Jesus looked at me with eyes that held no condemnation, but a sorrow deeper than oceans. I have loved you with an everlasting love, but you cannot receive what you refuse to give. I collapsed at his feet crying, not begging to be spared, but broken by the realization that I had carried chains I never needed to carry. I had locked doors I didn't know were mine to open. And then Jesus knelt beside me and placed his hand over my heart. I have brought you here because I love you, and because there is still time. The throne room began to fade in again. The light grew stronger, and I knew this was just the beginning of what he was going to show me. Before we continue, I want to ask you something from the deepest part of my soul. Is there someone you're still holding in your heart with bitterness? Maybe it's been years, maybe it's small, maybe you thought you moved on. But if this story is stirring something inside you, pause. Comment the name of someone you need to release, or just write, I forgive. This could be your turning point, your second chance. Let's keep going. Jesus stood beside me as the vision shifted. The light dimmed not in brightness but in tone. The air grew dense like grief made physical, and the ground beneath us began to change. I found myself standing on the edge of a vast expanse. What lay before me was not fire or brimstone, but something worse. A land cracked and dry, as if life had abandoned it long ago. And yet it was full of souls. They were scattered like lost children, but each one completely alone. No cries for help, just silent torment, and their eyes haunted me. These weren't murderers, not the kinds of people we picture when we speak of hell. These were faces I recognized. A deacon from my childhood church who used to greet every person at the door with a handshake and a smile. A youth leader who once prayed over my daughter at camp. Even a missionary couple I'd seen honored on stage for 30 years of overseas work. They were all here. I turned to Jesus, my voice barely a whisper. How can this be? They were good people. They gave their lives for you. They gave their lives for a version of me, not for me. They served my church, but never surrendered their wounds. One by one, their stories unfolded before me. Not with judgment, but with revelation. The youth leader had indeed prayed passionately, sung joyfully, led hundreds to Christ. But in his heart, he had never forgiven his brother for stealing from him during their teenage years. He'd spoken the words, but never released the pain. He'd let bitterness take root and quietly justify itself in his ministry. Every sermon colored by anger, every decision filtered through the wound. The deacon had smiled at everyone, but he had carried silent contempt for his own son, who had left the church and never returned. He saw himself as righteous and the boy as rebellious. He never said it out loud, but his heart had closed and never opened again. And when he died, that wall was still standing. The missionary woman had spent her life in jungles and cities far from home, feeding the poor, building schools. But she had never forgiven the man who abused her as a child. She believed she had. She said the words in counseling, but in truth, she buried the pain and let it harden into stone. I do not look at sacrifice without looking at the heart. I do not count works while love is withheld. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This wasn't justice the way I'd always understood it. It was deeper, more holy. It wasn't about punishment. It was about separation. Each person here had built a wall between themselves and grace. And when the moment came, they could not receive what they never learned to give. Then I saw her, Margaret Green. She had led the children's ministry at our church for over a decade. I remembered her flannel board lessons, the way she sang with the little ones, her arms always full of crafts and goldfish crackers. She was curled on the ground, her hands over her ears, surrounded by images that floated like memories in the air, each memory a missed opportunity, a kind word withheld, a cold shoulder given. And at the center of it all, her daughter. Margaret's daughter had married someone from a different faith. The scandal in our town was quiet but brutal. Margaret stopped attending family events. She refused to visit. She justified it as standing firm in truth. But her daughter never stopped calling, never stopped inviting, never stopped hoping. Margaret never responded. She died still convinced she was standing on holy ground. She confused stubbornness with conviction. She forgot that I am not just truth, I am also grace. I turned away, my eyes filled with tears I didn't know I still had. But there was one more soul I had to see. Pastor Williams, he baptized me when I was 17. He taught me about the love of God. His voice shaped my theology. His prayers once felt like thunder from heaven. Now he sat in dust, surrounded by shadows of those he had never forgiven. The elder who challenged his building plan. The youth leader who left to start another church. The couple who divorced after years of counseling. Faces all around him. He looked older than I remembered, hunched hollow, but still dressed in what remained of his pastoral robe. It was torn, faded, covered in dust. I gave him authority to bind and to loose, but he chose to bind hearts in silence while preaching freedom from the pulpit. He became a gatekeeper, not a gateway. The weight of those words crushed me. He had preached about forgiveness. He had taught it, quoted it, sung about it, but he hadn't lived it. Not fully, not deeply, and it had cost him everything. I stood there, unable to speak. Every face I saw, every soul I once admired, now broken not by a failure to believe, but by a refusal to release. Their sin was not hatred. It was hidden resentment, and Jesus watched it all, not with rage, but with sorrow, deeper than oceans. I never turned them away, but they turned their hearts from me, one small grudge at a time. In that moment, I finally understood. Hell is not full of rebels shaking fists at God. It is full of people who sang the songs, served the church, quoted the verses, but refused to let go. We stood in silence as the last images faded. My spirit felt like shattered glass, trying to piece itself back together. But I wasn't done. Jesus had more to show me. The scenery changed again, and I found myself in what looked like a cosmic courtroom. Not of marble or gold, but made of light and truth. In the center stood a scale unlike anything I had ever seen. It didn't just weigh actions, It weighed hearts. Jesus turned to me. This is how heaven measures not by numbers or deeds, but by love and mercy. One by one, souls stepped forward. The first was a man whose life had been filled with failure by every human standard. He had a criminal record, broken relationships, years of addiction. His scale tipped heavy at first with darkness, but then something changed. I watched as beams of light poured onto the other side of the scale. Forgiveness. He had forgiven the father who abandoned him, the friends who betrayed him, the system that failed him. He forgave when it cost him everything, and that opened the door for my grace to flow. The scale tipped toward mercy. Then came a woman I recognized, a community leader, a woman known for her charity work. She had sponsored dozens of orphans-led prayer rallies, marched for justice. Her scale began bright and heavy with good works. But then I saw it begin to shift. Darkness slowly gathered on the other side. She had never forgiven her daughter for getting pregnant out of wedlock. She had never forgiven her husband for breaking her trust. She had never forgiven herself for not being perfect. Unforgiveness is a dam, and grace cannot flow where the heart is blocked. Her scale trembled but never returned to balance. Soul after soul approached the scale. Some were obvious in their flaws, but radiant in forgiveness. Others flawless in appearance, but filled with hidden prisons of resentment. I finally understood. It wasn't that faith didn't matter, or good works, but without forgiveness, none of it could reach the heart. Forgiveness wasn't optional. It was a law as real as gravity. I taught you to pray, "Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors." This is not a suggestion. It is a spiritual law written into the foundation of heaven. I remembered how often I had prayed that prayer out of habit, never pausing to ask if I truly meant it. Forgive us as we forgive. It wasn't a poetic line, it was a warning. Then Jesus showed me something else, a river of light flowing from his throne, pure and powerful. It poured out like grace meant to heal, every wound wash away, every stain. But there were dams, barriers, walls made from pride and bitterness and fear. Each soul that carried unforgiveness had built their own blockade, brick by brick, year by year. Some were massive events, abuse, betrayal, trauma. Others were small, a cruel word, a forgotten birthday, a silent dismissal, but every one of them had the same result. The grace couldn't reach them, not because it wasn't offered, but because it had nowhere to go. I cannot pour into a heart that refuses to release. I cannot heal what you still hold on to. I saw my own dam, and I wept. It hadn't been built overnight. It was layer after layer of "I'll let it go later," of "they don't deserve forgiveness," of "I've moved on, but I hadn't, not really." And each brick, each silent grudge, each fake smile had kept me from the very mercy I so desperately needed. Jesus didn't yell, he didn't accuse. His words came like truth wrapped in light. The measure you use for others is the measure that will be used for you. And then softly, "You cannot love me while hating who I died for." Jesus brought me away from the courtroom and the scales. The light shifted again, and we were no longer in a heavenly place. We were somewhere that looked far more familiar, earth, but not the world as we know it. This was a version seen through spiritual eyes. I could see into homes, hearts, churches, and cities. Not what they showed on the outside, but what they carried within. The first thing I noticed was the weight, not on the ground, but on the people. Men and women walking around with invisible burdens. Some carried them on their backs, others chained around their ankles. No one else seemed to see them, but every step they took was a struggle. Unforgiveness is a weight the soul was never meant to carry. I saw a married couple sitting across from each other at the dinner table, smiling politely, asking about the kids, about work, but beneath their words were years of unspoken pain. A harsh comment from 5 years ago, a forgotten anniversary, a betrayal never fully healed. They still shared a house, but not a heart. They had built a truce, not a restoration. Love cannot thrive where resentment is fed. I saw children growing up in homes where forgiveness was never spoken, where apologies were withheld and grudges inherited like old furniture. Sons learning to shut down, daughters learning to self-protect, families fractured by offenses that were never healed, only buried. And buried things always rot. I saw churches where worship filled the air, but the spirit did not move, where hands were lifted, but hearts were cold. A deacon who hadn't spoken to an elder in 3 years. A worship leader still bitter from being passed over. A Sunday school teacher who judged a single mother from the back row. The songs sounded good, but heaven heard silence. When my body is divided, my presence is grieved. I saw prayer meetings where people begged for revival while holding hate in their hearts. I saw ministry teams asking for miracles while avoiding eye contact in the hallway. I saw communion taken with lips that had cursed someone earlier that day, and I wept because I saw myself in all of it. Jesus looked at me with sorrow and with patience. This is why many feel dry. This is why prayers go unanswered. This is why power is diminished. I saw bitterness passed from one generation to the next. Parents teaching their children who to avoid, who not to trust, who had wronged their family. Hatred disguised as history. Offense baptized as loyalty. Communities torn apart by things no one could even remember. The origin of families who hadn't spoken in years over a single argument. Neighborhoods divided by misunderstandings never reconciled. Then I saw something that shook me to my core. I saw myself, not the version in heaven, the one on earth, still living, still breathing, still carrying pain. I saw how my unforgiveness shaped my choices, how I avoided certain people at church, how I pulled away from conversations that felt threatening, how I overworked myself to prove I was better than the one who hurt me. I saw how I raised my voice at my daughter, not because of what she did, but because she reminded me of a tone I once heard from my mother-in-law. I saw how I corrected my son harshly, not because he was wrong, but because I had never healed from how my supervisor had treated me. Unhealed wounds always bleed on people who did not cut you. I thought forgiveness was about them, but I was poisoning my own life. I thought ignoring the pain meant I was moving on, but I was just teaching my heart to harden. I saw how every person I refused to forgive became a shadow in my life. Their actions lived rent-free in my mind. Their voices echoed in moments of stress. Their influence stretched far beyond what they deserved. What you do not release will eventually rule you. Then Jesus showed me something else. Moments I had missed, doors I had closed because of the pain I carried. A friendship I avoided. A prayer I didn't pray. A gift I buried all because bitterness had become my comfort zone. Unforgiveness shrinks the soul until joy has no room left to live. I wanted to fall to the ground and scream, not from guilt, but from grief, from the years I had lost, from the love I had blocked, from the freedom I never claimed. And still Jesus stood beside me, not with judgment, but with tears. "I never intended for you to carry this. I died to set you free." Jesus brought me into what looked like a prison. But there were no bars, no guards, no locked doors. Only people chained in place. Some sat still, others paced in circles, but none of them could leave. Each one was connected to someone else by chains, thin like spider silk, but unbreakable. I watched as they strained, pulled, screamed, even tried to cut the chains with their own hands. It didn't matter. Nothing broke. Jesus turned to me. "These are the ones who refused to forgive, and now they are bound to the people they never released." I saw a woman linked to the shadow of a man who had abused her. Every time he appeared, her soul flinched. She relived the pain again and again. She wasn't being tormented by him. She was being tormented by the memory she refused to surrender. Her pain was real, but so were her chains. I saw a father chained to the memory of his son, not because he hated him, but because he couldn't forgive himself. He had tried to be strong, but he had failed. And when his son left home and never returned, he blamed himself until the day he died. Now he sat in the dust, whispering apologies into silence. But he had never allowed forgiveness to flow inward. His soul had become its own prison. To withhold forgiveness from yourself is to deny the power of my cross. Then I saw something worse, a man chained to another soul. But the other soul had no idea. They walked freely in another realm unaware. Meanwhile, he followed like a ghost, dragged by rage. He never let go. Jesus looked into me. "When you refuse to forgive, you do not hold them captive. You make yourself a prisoner." I wanted to look away. The weight of it was too much. But Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. "The enemy's greatest deception is making my people believe that unforgiveness is power, that it is protection, that it is justice, but unforgiveness is none of these. It is poison, and it kills from the inside out." I watched the prisoners again. Some had carried their chains for decades. Faces aged not by time, but by bitterness. Others had built walls around their pain, thinking they were safe. But in truth, they had trapped themselves. A man who hadn't spoken to his brother in 20 years sat with a mirror in his lap. And every day he watched the same scene play out: the fight, the silence, the funeral he never attended. And he whispered over and over, "Why didn't I just pick up the phone?" Another woman sat holding a book of records. Every name, every offense written in perfect script. But the pages glowed with heat, burning her fingers as she turned them. She refused to let go of even one. Love keeps no record of wrongs, but she did, and now her own record burns her. Then I saw something that pierced me deeper than anything else. A teenage girl chained to the memory of a friend. The friend had bullied her, ignored her, humiliated her. But the girl hadn't carried revenge. She had carried worthlessness. She believed the lie that she deserved to be treated that way. And that lie became her identity. She never forgave because she never believed she had value. Jesus knelt beside her. Forgiveness is not just for others. Sometimes it is the key to setting yourself free. I looked around this place and understood. Forgiveness was not just an act of kindness. It was the key. The key to release, the key to healing, the key to life. And every soul who refused it, no matter how justified they felt, was living in a prison they themselves had built. And worst of all, they held the key the whole time, but they never used it. The vision shifted again. I was back in my church, the one I'd attended for 15 years. But something was different. I could see beneath the surface. Every pew held a story. Every face carried a fracture. I saw the worship team leading with passion, but behind one smile was a buried offense over a decision made months ago. Behind another was jealousy, resentment, comparison. They were harmonizing in music, but dissonant in spirit. I saw the prayer team praying boldly but avoiding each other's gaze. Two of them hadn't spoken since a disagreement about how to organize a women's event. I saw the senior pastor preaching truth with fire. But in the spirit, I saw exhaustion, frustration, disappointment. He carried offenses he'd never voiced. Wounds from people who had left hurtful letters, criticism, betrayal. He'd kept leading, but he'd stopped healing. And I saw myself there in the 5th row, lifting my hands, singing the songs but guarded, closed quietly, measuring who deserved my kindness and who didn't. Jesus stood beside me. His face was filled with both grief and love. They gather in my name, but they have forgotten my way. They sing of grace, but withhold it from each other. They pray for revival, but hold on to resentment. I looked across the room and saw more the usher, who still hadn't forgiven the pastor for a harsh correction years ago. The choir member who rolled her eyes every time someone else was chosen for a solo. The elder who secretly despised another family for how their child had behaved in youth group. They smiled, they served, they tithed, but inside they were divided. They have replaced my presence with performance. They have traded my power for politeness, and it is killing my church from the inside out. I fell to my knees. I saw what I had missed all these years. It wasn't the big sins. It wasn't the scandals. It wasn't the world. It was us, our coldness, our pride, our private scorecards. I saw how my own bitterness had shaped how I spoke to younger women, how my hurt had made me suspicious in ministry, how my silence had contributed to the atmosphere of spiritual isolation. Jesus knelt beside me. I am calling for a cleansing of hearts, not just of behavior, but of motive, of memory, of wounds. I am not asking for perfect churches. I am asking for honest ones. I am calling my people to forgive, to release, to love. I felt a stirring inside me, a burning that wasn't shame, it was purpose. He wasn't showing me this to crush me. He was commissioning me. You will return and you will speak what you have seen. Not to condemn, but to awaken. Some will reject it, but others will be set free. I looked into his eyes and saw what I had never truly seen before. A love so deep, it would confront a mercy so fierce it would not stay silent. I whispered, but what if they don't believe me? What if they mock me? What if I fail? Jesus reached out, touched my forehead. I will give you the words. I will open the hearts. Your job is to tell the truth. Leave the rest to me. The vision began to fade again, but his presence stayed. I wasn't returning the same. Because I no longer saw people as I once did. I saw their chains, their walls, their silent aching, and I knew the message wasn't mine. It was his. And it was time. When I came back into my body, there was no dramatic gasp for air, no flashing lights, just stillness. But I knew everything had changed. I was not the same woman who went under those floodwaters. I had died one way and came back another. My theology had been stripped, my pride shattered, my mask torn off. I had seen what few are allowed to see. I had stood before the King, and he had shown me the truth about me, the truth about the church, the truth about unforgiveness. It is not a minor issue. It is not a soft sin. It is a spiritual cancer, the silent killer of the soul. It divides families, destroys churches, poisons generations, and blocks the flow of grace. You cannot love God and hate His children. You cannot preach mercy and hoard offense. You cannot claim the cross and deny forgiveness. Forgiveness is not optional. It is essential. It is not weakness. It is power. It is not an emotion. It is obedience. And now you have heard what I saw. You have no more excuses. The chains you carry are not locked. The door to freedom has no guard. The key has always been in your hands. Use it. Let go. Release them. Forgive them. Bless them not because they deserve it, but because He forgave you when you didn't. Do it before it's too late. Do it while there is still time. And if this message has pierced even one layer of your heart, don't scroll past. Don't go quiet. Don't pretend it didn't stir you. Type Amen in the comments. Share this with someone you've been avoiding. Subscribe for more truth. Because this message isn't just for you, it's for a generation drowning in bitterness. And time is running out.